Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining and welcome to the EMA press briefing on the new pharmacovigilance legislation. My name is Monika Benstedt. I think most of you know me. Today we've hit the 5-month mark on our countdown to the entry into force of the new pharmacovigilance legislation. We've sent out a press release earlier today, and now this is really your opportunity to ask questions, and your questions will be very expertly answered by Noël Wathion, who is the head of patient health protection, and by Peter Arlett, the head of pharmacovigilance and risk management. Noël will start with a very brief introduction, and then we will open the floor to all of you for any questions. Before we start, just a quick reminder, but I will repeat this again when we come to it. To ask a question, you will need to press 0. To cancel your question, please press 7. And if you need to speak to an operator, please press the hash key. But I will remind you, and you probably have instructions anyway ahead of you. So I shall hand over now to Noël for an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monika, and good afternoon to everybody. You will have seen the press release of the implementation plan that has been published this morning. So I'm going to give you a short overview of the topics that have been addressed there. So first of all, I would like to say that the new pharmacovigilance legislation is going to have the biggest impact on the agency since its establishment in 1995. In fact, it is not pharmacovigilance in the most strict sense, but it will have an impact on the entire life cycle of medicines. So we're looking into here as well in patient safety and rational use of medicines. The objectives of the new legislation are to better promote and protect public health, and we have a number of ways in order to achieve that through clearer roles and responsibilities, engaging patients and healthcare professionals, more science-based, better integration of benefit and risk, increased proactivity, reduction of duplication, and increase in efficiency, and increased transparency and better information to patients, healthcare professionals, and the general public. It's also fair to say that we're not only looking at further strengthening the legislation, we have to bear in mind that Europe already has a very strong pharmacovigilance system, so we are finding ways in order to further improve it, to strengthen it, and to rationalize it. And it's important that whilst the agency and the member states are now working together in order to implement the legislation, that, of course, we are also continuing the current processes for the protection and the promotion of public health. For the implementation that you will have noticed from the implementation plan, activities contributing to public health have been given the highest priority, followed by activities increasing transparency and improving communication, followed by activities that simplify processes. In order to do so, and acknowledging that this is a very big project that you will have to implement together with the national authorities, we have put a robust governance in place together with the member states to ensure that the implementation is successful and delivers for public health. If I may perhaps highlight a few of the key features that will come into operation this year is the establishment of a new committee for the agency, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee. It's the operation of a new urgent union procedure for safety issues concerning centrally and nationally authorized products. It's implementing a procedure for protocol approval of post-marketing safety studies and results management. It's a revised process for signal detection for centrally authorized medicines led by the agency. It's a revised process for coordination of pharmacovigilance inspections. It talks about increased transparency by being more open in terms of agendas, recommendations, opinions, and minutes from our scientific committees. It's also looking at the possibility to introduce a novel concept of public hearings, and more information about everything which is planned for 2012 that you can find in the implementation plan. Finally, I would to end by saying that, of course, today is not a one-off exercise in terms of communicating with the outside world. We are planning to provide at regular intervals information on a monthly basis. You may also see an update on how we are progressing with the implementation, but there will be major consultations which will happen over the next couple of months in terms, for instance, of the good pharmacovigilance practices that we will release for public consultation and where we will be inviting comments. So with this short introduction, I will hand now over to Monica.
Thank you very much. Now the floor is open for your questions. Just a quick reminder, please press 0 if you want to ask a question. Can we have the first question now? Okay. I think that's Ian Scofield. Ian, please.
Hello?
Yeah. Ian, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. It's Ian Schofield here from Scrip. Thanks for organising this and for that introduction. One question I was wondering, it says in the implementation plan that the signal detection process is being revised, and I think that's effective from July. Can you explain what has actually changed in this respect?
I heard it. Can I just put back, sorry, Peter Arlett here, and good afternoon to everyone on the line. Just to check, we heard you correctly, Ian. You were talking about a process for signal detection. Is that correct?
Yes, it said in the implementation plan that this process has been revised.
Yes, indeed. I think it's important, first of all, just to make sure that we have a common understanding. So signal detection, by signal detection we mean the process to scrutinize data, including spontaneously reported adverse drug reactions in the Utrovigilance database for either new or changing safety issues. Now, for centrally authorized products, the European Medicines Agency has been taking a primary role for signal detection for many years, and for nationally authorized products, the member states have been working at a national level in terms of scrutinizing particularly their national data. Now, the new legislation is really groundbreaking in this respect because for the first time in legislation, signal detection is recognized as the critical public health process that it is. So what we will be focusing on with the new process for centrally authorized products is ensuring that building on the current process, we're reviewing data in the Utrovigilance database at least monthly for all centrally authorized products, and more frequently for products that have had recent authorization or a change to the way they're being used, and that this will be underpinned by processes that will be subject to audit. In addition to that reinforced process for centrally authorized products, for the first time in a formal way, there will be, at a European level, exchange of information and coordinated signal detection for nationally authorized products. And it's foreseen to have different member states leading on different drug substances, supported by data provision and analysis by the European Medicines Agency, and then formal exchange of validated signals through the European Medicines Agency and scrutinized by this new committee, the Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard, there's the next question from Richard Staines. Richard, your question, please.
Oh, hi, Richard Staines here for APM News for Peter Arlett. We spoke at the EGA conference, and I was trying to find out if you could tell me what was the outcome of the meeting on Monday regarding the new data requirements and also the task force that's going to be put in place.
Okay, so maybe if I just very briefly remind everyone what Article 57 is about, just in case not everyone on the call was at the EGA conference. And then what I think I will do is then hand over to Noël Wathion, who chaired that industry workshop on Monday, so he's probably best placed to give the outcome. So just for those of you who aren't familiar, Article 57 is a really important new legal provision in this pharmacovigilance legislation, which requires the European Medicines Agency to establish lists of medicinal products and the substances they And these lists are to be based on structured data submitted by the pharmaceutical industry, and that's clearly laid down in the legislation. These lists are important because they'll improve public health by facilitating the identification of medicines in adverse reaction reports, and also by allowing strengthened coordination of pharmacovigilance. An example of this might be by allowing the national agencies or the European Medicines Agency to identify all the products impacted by a referral, for example, or a periodic safety update, for example, particularly when those assessments are done based on a drug substance rather than product by product. Specifically, in terms of the legal provisions, the Article 57 requires the European Medicines Agency to publish the format for the structured submission of information, and the deadline for that was July 2011, and the EMA published that format ahead of that deadline. The legislation then requires the industry to submit information on their products by this July 2012, and then the industry has a legal obligation to keep their information up to date after July 2012 for the long-term maintenance of these lists for the coordination of pharmacovigilance. I think it's probably also important to highlight that the new legislation also foresees implementation of ISO standards for the identification of medicinal products, and that will take place with the full implementation of the legislation over the coming years. So maybe before I hand over to Noël Wathion in relation to specifically the workshop, I think it's probably also important to say that when we published the format for the submission of information last July, we were guided by the legislation, but also guided by the fact that the longer-term goal is ISO implementation. And so what we did was we built on the existing Vigilance medicinal product dictionary. We aimed to minimize the need for industry to resubmit data now or in the future, and we also tried to move in a phased way to ISO by including ISO data elements where possible. And then finally, I would just mention that in addition to publishing the format and the schema for the industry, we've also been trying to facilitate industry's job by putting in place information days, specific training, as well as working on an IT data entry tool, particularly aimed at small and medium-sized enterprises, but which will be of use to any pharmaceutical company that wants to use it. So maybe on that note, I'll hand over to Noël Wathion relating to the workshop that was held on Monday.
Thank you, Peter. The workshop was held last Monday in order to discuss with pharmaceutical industry associations the concerns that they have raised, and then to discuss with them as well a way forward. Now, the concerns that have been raised by pharmaceutical industry have primarily been about the legal deadline for the submission of information, which is July of this year, and visibility to submit all the information included in the published format that Peter was referring to. So over the past couple of months, we have carefully listened to the industry concerns. We have been reviewing them carefully, and what we have discussed with industry is a way forward, and there was an agreement in terms of the data set that needs to be submitted by July 2012, which will be a mandatory data set and which will be focusing on structured information in relation to medicinal products. What we also have discussed with industry, as was already referred to by Peter, is to move forward, because this is an intermediate step with then the final outcome or the ultimate delivery should then be the implementation of the international standards. And that will be a process of discussion with industry over the past couple of months in order to arrive at that particular objective of full implementation beyond July 2012. Now, in terms of communicating on this, the outcome of that workshop, what we're planning to do over the next few weeks is to go public with that particular outcome, but also we will give further details in terms of the ways that the agency, as Peter has referred to, will be helping pharmaceutical industry in order to facilitate meeting the deadline of July 2012. Peter already referred to the data entry tool, which is of course available for SMEs or will be available for SMEs, but not only. It depends on the choice of the pharmaceutical industry or company concerned. It will be in terms of revised guidance, in terms of training, etc. So this is very briefly the outcome of the meeting. And if I'm not mistaken, you also made a reference to the task force that was referred to at the EGA conference. So a little bit more of information here. The task force has to be seen in the overall governance of the implementation of the pharmacovigilance legislation. So in fact, the task force was already established in 2010, but at that moment focused more on preparing for the new legislation, whereas the focus now is more on the implementation and overseeing the implementation of the legislation over the next months to come. In addition to this refocus, we also the task forces will now be more with senior management of the agency and will be headed by the executive director. So perhaps I will stop here and see if you have any other questions on this topic.
Richard, are you satisfied with that?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to see maybe a little bit. I'm not sure if a telephone conversation is the right kind of way to do this, but I'd like to see a little bit more about the actual agreement reached and the data that will be required from July. But I suspect that would be one to kind of exchange of documents over the internet or something like that.
No, indeed. So we will publish. We will publish the outcome of that particular meeting in terms of this is the way forward, shorter term, and also what we're planning to do then longer term. That will be accompanied by a revised legal notice, and then later on you will have a revised guidance. I can perhaps also say that the industry associations last Monday raised a number of more specific comments that will be further discussed in a virtual workshop with the industry associations next week, Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, on the 9th of February. After that meeting, we will then revise our guidance, and that will be published. So you will see the outcome of all these exercises in the next few weeks.
Thank you very much.
And let's move on to the next question. I think that's from Jerome Byrne. Jerome, please.
Hello, it's Jerome Byrne here from the Daily Mail. Shall I start asking my question?
Yes, please.
Okay. I may have missed something at the beginning. I didn't come in until a little bit after the start. But specifically, my understanding of the problems that there's been with the pharmacovigilance system in the past is, first of all, that quite a lot of doctors don't fill in their reports. In fact, at one point a couple of years ago, there was actually quite a decline in the number of reports. I wondered if that was seen as a problem, and if so, what steps are being taken to do anything about it. And secondly, in my experience with the problems that were around Avandia of last year, it was very clear that there were a lot of reports which made a difference between rosiglitazone and also the other drug, Actos, and there were quite different patterns of problems showing up in the yellow card system, but it took something like 3 years for any action to be taken over it from the time that there was first doubts raised about rosiglitazone. I was wondering if you can tell me exactly what is going to change that will mean that that won't happen in the future.
Thank you, Jerome. Peter Arlett here. I'll address your question. So your first question was about what this new legislation is trying to improve. And
what is it going to do to change some of the obvious problems?
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe just a bit of background, and apologies to some of the other colleagues on the line if I touch on a couple of the points that Noël Wathion made in his introductory remarks. I think it's first of all important to say that this legislation actually started being investigated, as it were, perhaps 8 years ago when the European Commission launched an independent study into the European system for pharmacovigilance. It started in about 2004. And that independent study was conducted by an organisation called Fraunhofer, and identified strengths of the European system and actually said it was comparable to the best international systems for pharmacovigilance, but also identified opportunities to strengthen the system further. There were points about the fact that because the European system has a number of different actors involved, there's a need to clarify the different roles and responsibilities. So what precisely the responsibility of the pharmaceutical company, what's precisely the responsibility of the member state, what's precisely the responsibility of the European Medicines Agency working with the European Commission. It was also identified that patients and healthcare professionals, apart from the reporting of suspected adverse reactions and for taking part in studies by healthcare professionals, and then, if you like, being right on the receiving end of the outputs of regulation, so patient information leaflets, summaries of product characteristics, there really wasn't much engagement with patients and healthcare professionals during the process. It was very much an interaction between regulator and regulated industry. I think also there had been over the years a very big focus on reporting requirements, and it was felt that or the studies suggested there was a need to strengthen the scientific basis of pharmacovigilance. And part of that is better and more coherent integration of benefit and risk, and when we assess a product, looking at the benefits and risks together in a balanced way. Perhaps one other area is that sometimes, particularly for medicines that have been on the market for a long time, there was sometimes a lack of a plan to study the medicine and its safety profile better. And so this has led to a more systematic application of risk management planning, together with a stronger basis for the regulators to require post-authorization studies, including safety studies, to be done for products on the market. And I suppose one other issue that is worth highlighting is that there was a call for greater transparency as to the process, as to the decision-making, and the new legislation will deliver over the coming years really quite a marked increase in transparency as applied to pharmacovigilance medicines regulation in general. You then asked about the specific issue of underreporting by doctors. In the vast majority of member states in Europe, reporting by healthcare professionals is not a legal requirement. The legislation places obligations on the member state regulatory authorities, on the European Medicines Agency, and on the pharmaceutical industries, but it's not placing direct obligations on healthcare professionals. Now, in one or two member states, there is national law that compels healthcare professionals to report, but interestingly, if you compare the reporting levels in those member states with the reporting levels in member states that don't have that legal compulsion, it's not a lot different. So what it would suggest is that putting a direct law against doctors doesn't actually improve the situation. The way this has been approached, however, is on a number of fronts. Firstly, if you go back 10 years, in many member states in Europe, it was only doctors that were allowed to report, together with coroners, for example. And over the last 10, 15 years, reporting has been opened up systematically to pharmacists, and that's had a big impact on reporting in a positive way. Also, nurses and other healthcare professionals are now actively encouraged to report through the national reporting schemes. I think the big headline of this new legislation, or one of the big headlines, is the formal introduction of patient reporting. And under this new legislation, all patients in Europe will have a right to report a suspected side effect to their national authorities or to the company that supplied the medicine, whichever they feel more comfortable, I suppose, to do. And that will be done at national level, and then all those reports will come from the national level into the European database, where they can be shared between all the different national authorities and the European Medicines Agency, so that we can faster and better detect new or changing safety issues. Your last question was about rosiglitazone, and you compared it to pioglitazone. Without going into the detail of that specific case, that was a very, very interesting benefit-risk analysis based on accumulating evidence over time. So at the time of authorization, there was clear evidence of efficacy and even the hope that it would reduce cardiovascular risk. I'm talking about rosiglitazone now. But further clinical trials did not further confirm the efficacy, and over the years, various studies suggested that the cardiac risk was actually greater than had been originally thought. And so this required, year after year, a reassessment of the benefits and risks of the product. And finally, in the summer of 2010, the judgment was taken that the benefits finally did not outweigh the risks, and in Europe the product was withdrawn. Now, how will the new legislation affect that? Well, in multiple ways, and I won't repeat my initial answer, but the legislation delivers clear roles and responsibilities. It engages healthcare professionals and patients. It's more science-based. It integrates benefits and risks. It increases risk management planning and proactivity. It gives very clear obligations for post-authorization studies to further elaborate safety issues or potential safety issues if they're detected at the time of authorization. And all this together really should make a big impact to improve public health protection. Thank you.
Can I just ask a supplementary question on that?
Please do.
Yes, one of the, I'm not quite clear from what you've said, or my understanding of what you've said is that actually there isn't going to be anything specific done differently as far as the doctors are concerned. You said that there's going to be a greater concentration on patients, and pharmacologists and nurses and so on are all encouraged, but the issue of doctors, there doesn't seem to be anything specific. You said it wasn't beneficial to do any legal changes. But putting that on one side, I'm getting the feedback now. Putting that on one side, I'm just curious about the issue of how long it should take for follow-up or investigations, trials to be done. I think in the case of Avandia, it took something like 10 years for the trial to be done. Is that the kind of length of time that's thought to be suitable?
So just a quick answer relating to the doctor reporting. Yes, my answer was a long answer, and sometimes you forget the specific question as you're going through a long answer. And I think I just wanted to highlight that the real headline of the new legislation in terms of spontaneous reporting, so suspected adverse drug reaction reporting, was patient reporting. Right. And patients have enormously welcomed that, and it's a big step forward. Right. In terms of doctor reporting really should remain the backbone of the reporting system. Doctor reporting has been in place for 40, 50 years in many member states, and it is the medical judgment and the suspicion from a highly qualified healthcare professional which adds huge value. That's not to say that you can't have huge value from patient reports as well, but the doctor reports, if you like, they're making a potential diagnosis and associating it with the medicine, and that has a huge value. We are working with the member states on education of healthcare professionals, although most of the delivery of that education will be done at a national level. But we're also working with the member states on facilitating reporting. So thinking about internet reporting, web-based reports, telephone hotlines, etc. Again, most of that will be done at national level, but based on best practice shared at European level. I'll hand over to Noël Wathion relating to the follow-up and duration of studies.
Yes, perhaps we should also say that, as Peter mentioned, spontaneous reporting, whether by healthcare professionals or by patients, is an important and remains an important cornerstone. But we have already identified a couple of years ago, when the new legislation, when the previous legislation was introduced, that also the mindset has to be changed a little bit. It's not only in terms of having a reactive approach, it's also important to have a more and more proactive approach. And what we introduced in 2005, and what in fact now has been further strengthened, is this concept of risk management plans. It is a very important concept, because what does it do? At the moment that an assessment is being done on a medical product on the market, the regulators are being forced, if I may use that word, in order to think, what do we know already about this medicine? What don't we know yet about this medicine? What can we do in order to, and where do we have uncertainties? Where do we have certain concerns? What can we do in order to further, add to the knowledge level on a particular medicinal product? So this is proactive pharmacovigilance. That looks into a risk management plan. It's about asking post-authorization safety studies. So we're trying still to acknowledge the importance of the spontaneous reporting scheme, but in addition to that, that's complemented with more proactive measures, primarily through risk management plans. And then finally, it is also about more urgent decision-making, more rapid procedures for coming to particular conclusions when we have doubts about the benefit-risk of medicinal products. And through the introduction of that urgent union procedure, we are going to achieve that. And on top of it, what is even more important is transparency about the whole outcome of the scientific review process.
I don't want to. If someone else wants to ask a question, please, I'll sort of give way, as it were. But if not, there was the example of the record trial for Avandia, which I think took 10 years to complete. I'm just wondering whether that's the kind of time frame that is thought to be adequate for follow-up trials of drugs about which there are uncertainties.
Maybe just a little answer, and then maybe rather than going into the detail of rosiglitazone and pioglitazone, a couple of points. Firstly, and I'm not talking specifically about the record study now, I'm talking in more general terms. I think it's a well-established fact in drug safety monitoring that safety issues might arise at any time in the life cycle of a product. For example, certain side effects only occur after some delay from exposure. Some safety issues are related to an accumulation of toxicity over time, for example. Now, your point, I think, was more about are companies doing the studies quickly enough? Now, part of that is about the rarity of the event and, if you like, statistical power to detect something, and part of that is about compliance. Interestingly, and maybe as a follow-up, and I'm assuming that the colleagues here from our press office have your details. Yeah. We can send you a study that was published last year, which actually looked at the studies required by the CHMP, so the main committee here at the EMA, in I think 1997 or 96 or 97, and looked at the follow-up. And actually, we were pleasantly surprised that the compliance was really very high with the requirements put in place. The reason I stress that is you often hear people say, lots of companies don't comply with studies placed on them. And in fact, the evidence doesn't back that up. Companies comply quite well.
So the rate here is much better than that in America.
Yeah, well, and my final comment would be the new legislation definitely strengthens the legal basis for regulators to impose studies on the companies, and therefore the ability to follow up and ensure that companies comply. So I'm confident that this new legislation will have an impact in making sure that good, high-quality studies get done in a timely manner.
Thank you.
So I see that we have actually approached the end of our 30 minutes, and I don't see any further questions. So I would assume now that probably everybody has really had a chance to ask what they wanted to ask. As you know, the press office is always open to send in more questions. We will, of course, deal with it. Thank you very much to our two speakers, Mr. Arlett and Wathion. We will hope that, as Noël said, we are committed to provide you further information as we move along the process towards July, and we hope that this press briefing today was really the first one in a series of similar events. So for now, goodbye and have a very nice afternoon and speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.